Welcome back. Now what we're going to take a look at is how you plan the research design and gather the primary data. And we're going to walk all the way through the basics of doing a primary research study. Now to do that, we're going to use a specific example. And the specific example we're going to use is this. This is, let me just roll back here, pull this back, do this. This is Beatbox Beverages. I'm going to swing it around for you. Okay. Beatbox Beverages was put together by MBA students of mine at the University of Texas at Austin. Hence my Texas shirt today. Okay. Texas shirt. Hence my Texas shirt today. And they did it by doing a lot of extensive research. Now, Beatbox, you can look them up, beatboxbeverages.com. It's a wine-based product. It's an alcohol product that they thought would work in the marketplace. And so far, they've been proven correct. They've raised a lot of money. Mark Cuban is now their lead investor. And what they did was they set up a primary research study. And this is where I come in, because while I was at UT, I worked with them to do this particular study and help them get through the process. So what is primary data? Well, primary data is stuff you collect for the first time. So when you do your own research study, that's primary data. It targets your very specific research questions. In the case of Beatbox, their research questions were 3. Number 1, what were people thinking was missing in the alcohol market at the time? Number 2, would they drink a wine-infused product? Number 3, how much would they pay for this product? And they actually had a 4th one too. Where would the consumers expect to find this particular product? Okay. So what they did was they set up specific research questions to answer each one of those objectives very clearly. They then went out and fielded the study. Now, normally research is expensive. A study like this, if they hired a firm, would be in the tens of thousands of dollars. But because they were students, they did it themselves. And that's why for this particular project you're working on, your marketing project, you probably want to field something similar to what they did to answer the core questions that you want to answer in your marketing plan. So the first thing you did is you look for opportunities. That's your first particular assignment. The next one, which is due next week, says buyer behavior. So now you have to think about how would consumers buy this particular product? What's the process they go through? Where do they expect to find it? You're looking for all of those things as you do this. And then the third piece is going to be the KPIs, which are your key performance indicators. How do you know if you're on track for getting this thing done? So you think about those things, that starts to roll out what your marketing research should look like. Now, because this course is so short, I didn't have you go out and research with customers. But what you want to do is find some friends who would be in the area and would be willing to talk to you about how they think they would buy, where they would buy, okay? Make sure these friends are kind of in your target market. So, don't ask somebody who's 20 if you're targeting a product that's aimed at 50-year-olds, for example, okay? You might want to talk to your parents and your parents' friends for stuff like that. But you're going to use a convenience sample. And go out and talk to 10 or a dozen people each. So there's 2 of you in your group, 24 people. Okay, so you're going to go test that out. Now, where do you want to go from there? Well, the next thing you want to do as you go through this is, what kind of testing are you going to do? Well, how are you going to ask the questions? Well, you could go and do some in-home interviews. It's probably not going to work because you guys are spread all over the place. Mall intercepts, you go stand in a shopping mall and ask people, probably not. That's an old school system. We don't see that too often. You're probably going to either do it through telephone or email. Okay, so you're going to set up a phone call, ask the questions you've got, or you'll send them an email and say, hey, can you answer these questions? And if you really want to get fancy, use SurveyMonkey and send them questions using SurveyMonkey. But keep in mind, if you use SurveyMonkey for free, you're limited to 10 questions. So if you've got more than that, you're probably better off sending an email and asking them to answer the questions for you. Sometimes we use other methods. One's called executive interviews. That's usually used if you're doing something in the B2B space where there's a very few number of customers. You pick out the most important customers and go interview them in depth for about an hour, hour and a half, okay? Or you can use focus groups. Focus groups are segments of your population that you bring in and ask these questions. The problem with focus groups is this. It gives you a really small sample. Now, it may work for your study this summer if you can put together a focus group, okay? Get 5 or 6 or up to 10 people that fall into your target market, and ask them the questions all at one time. And they record their responses. Yeah, you're all done. Okay, if each one of you in the group does that, I'll give you like maximum 20 people. Boom, you're good. The downside with focus groups is because the size of the sample is so small, in real life, they're more of a qualitative. They give you direction. They're a qualitative study, and they give you direction like executive interviews. They're not a quantitative decision making because your sample size is so small. So be careful if you're using executive interviews or focus groups. Great if you've got a small market size. If you're doing a consumer-based product, probably not the greatest because you're not going to get a very broad look at the market. Now, part of this is you have to set up questions. Questions come in 2 types. One is open-ended. How are you feeling today? Is an open-ended question. And you could write, I'm feeling great because, okay? The other one is closed-ended. In closed-ended, you give the person the options. So we could ask them, how are you feeling today? Option A, sad. Option B, depressed. Option C, forlorn. And we describe those so they know exactly what they mean, so we've got some continuity. Option D, happy. Option F, ecstatic. Okay. And we get them to check that off. That's one way. We give them the answers. The other way we could ask it is using some sort of scaled response on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I'm feeling sad today and 10 is I'm feeling great. How are you feeling today? Okay? That's a closed-ended question. And those are the 2 types you get. Now, good questions are short. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling today is not the greatest question because that's really open to interpretation. We'd have to explain that. But it's a good start for our case, okay? And you do avoid double-barreled questions. Double-barreled questions are you ask 2 things at one time. So, how are you feeling today? And will this affect your behavior? That's a double-barreled question. If you come back to Beatbox, a good question for them would be, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is very unhappy and 10 is very happy, how would you describe the current selection of alcoholic products at the beer store, okay, or at the convenience store? Or on where would you expect to find Beatbox? Discounter, e.g. Walmart, convenience store, beer store, liquor store, all of the above. Okay, those are good examples of closed-ended questions. We'd ask something about the taste. Did you find the taste X? That could be a yes or no. Usually that's not a great question because it's not giving us a lot of detail. We could ask them about, did you find the taste on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is tasteless and 10 is overwhelming? How would you rate the taste of this of the tea in this particular product? Because I've got the Texas tea version of Beatbox. We'd ask questions like that, but they're clear, they're concise. Clear meaning that the user understands exactly what you mean by them, and concise means they get right to the point. You don't want long, flowery questions. You want something that's direct. Okay? So that's kind of the basics of asking questions. Now we've got some other survey types. We've got mystery shoppers, heavily used in the retail industry. In a mystery shopper, what happens is they hire somebody who comes in, goes through the entire purchase process, and rates things like the appearance of the store, how helpful the sales staff was, how smooth the transaction was. What they're looking for are ways that they can improve the service capability of that retailer. We could do observation research. I used to work with a fellow at the University of Manitoba who did a lot of observational research. His research area was embarrassing purchases. Specifically, he looked at the purchase of condoms. And what he did was he would work as a clerk at either a grocery store or a drugstore on Friday and Saturday nights. He poses the clerk, working there to look at the purchase behavior patterns of people coming in to buy condoms. He also did a few other observational studies, and he's become quite famous for them as well. His name's Darren Dahl, if you want to look it up. Okay? We could do behavioral targeting. We could take a look using social media at what people are doing. So we could go out and target and see what they're doing. That we can find from Facebook and Google Analytics. We could get them to do virtual shopping. That's really the big one that's coming up now. Back in the day, back when I got my degree, in the dark days of the 80s when dinosaurs were roaming the earth, we didn't have the virtual shopping. If we wanted to do a shopping test, we'd go and we'd rent a store out, or we'd build a store in a warehouse somewhere, a mock store, take people through to see what they did. Today, we can do that all virtually using headsets. But what we're looking for there is where consumers look. So we can follow their eyes. We look at how they see a product. So if they see a product that's of interest to them, where do they look on the product? How do they pick it up? When they're reading it, where do they focus on? We can do all that virtually now. Okay. We can also run experiments. That was one of the things I did in grad school, is we ran experiments. And the experiment I worked on was for the Marriott's Courtyard Inns, because they weren't around at the time. They were just testing them. We tried to find the optimal shape of the room. Should it be long and narrow, or shorter and wider? And what we did was we had an old Marriott that was being renovated outside Washington, D.C. that we could take people to. And we could change the wall widths and the shape of the room to get their opinion as they went into this particular location. Well, that allowed us to figure out what the room should look like. Okay, that was an experiment. Walmart does experiments a lot. They usually do pricing experiments. And what they do is they figure out what price they can charge in a different location or at a different Walmart store in the same city and not lose sales. So they'll set a price of diapers, is the one that I'm most familiar with. They'll set the price of diapers higher in a richer area of town than in a lower socioeconomic area. Very interesting. Okay, that way they can check their volume. Okay, we've got our questions. We've got our system. Now what we need to do is pick our sample. And we've already talked a bit about this. So samples break down into probability and non-probability samples. Non-probability is what we've talked about. Go and ask your friends. It's a convenience sample, all right? Sometimes you can get a snowball effect where you'll ask a friend, hey, who else should I talk to? They'll get you on, but that's still a non-probability sample because you're going off of that central relationship. You can do probability samples. Probability samples are heavily used, like the Coke example, or Coke used that particular system in doing the research talked about in the video for the last chapter when they found out what consumers were looking for, okay? So probability samples could be simple random samples. Easy enough to do. You get a random number generator which starts generating phone numbers, starts calling them. You see which ones are answered. You're looking for residential only. That's a random sample. Okay, that's a very basic random sample. You could do a stratified random sample. Okay, stratified random sample says I need a random piece, but I also need to reflect the population, X number of people who are between the ages of 18 and 24, a certain number between 25 and 34. And that gives you a stratified system. So you look for people who fall into that category, and once one category is full, you don't put more people into it. That's stratified random sample. You could use a cluster sample, and your textbook talks about a cluster sample, so I'll leave that one for you. Or you could use a systematic sample. This is an old school method. Okay, this is what we used when I first started. You get a telephone book out, you mark down the third name on the book, for example, and then every third name after that you call. That was a very simple systematic piece. Or we used to have random number tables. that we could use too to pick people out. We don't use those so much anymore. All that's electronic now, thank goodness. That took a lot of time. Now we're to the final steps. We go and collect the data. Usually companies will write the questions and test the questions. They'll want to analyze it, but they leave the fielding, the actual calls, they'll outsource that to a firm that does nothing but calls, because they've got the list to call and they're experienced at getting the best possible efficiency, which is crucial in this area, okay? We then bring the data in and we analyze it. And I've already talked a bit about that. We look for the means, the crosstabs, the frequencies. How often did somebody say this, okay? We use that. And we do the report using PowerPoint. And then we do the follow-up. What happened with the report and why, okay? Now, presenting the report, back in my days running the Prairie Center for Business Intelligence, once got a report telling me what the status of the Canadian medical device industry was. It was 100 PowerPoint slides. Or sorry, it was 33 PowerPoint slides, cost $100,000. Okay, so you can see research is expensive. And that's why big companies are very careful about doing it. And if you're a small company looking at doing it, like BeatBox, your best bet is go out, find some students to help you out like you, or like you're doing in this project, so that you can get your results quickly, efficiently, but most of all, cheaply. When you come back, we're going to talk about the internet. See you in a few.